All right. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Today, we're going to be experiencing the second lecture in the State of Canada lecture series. And this lecture is Transition to the Carney Era 1 Year In. The purpose of this lecture series is to kind of look at these major forces that are shaping our country in these times of crisis, change, big change. There's a lot of shifting political dynamics, geopolitical issues, rising regional tensions, economic uncertainty, climate uncertainty, and kind of understanding where Canada stands in the context strikes us as pretty important. So my name is Marc-André Pigeon, or Marc-André Pigeon. I'm an assistant professor in the Johnson Schwammer Graduate School of Public Policy right here, and I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives. And just a little bit about the Johnson Schwammer Graduate School of Public Policy, or JSGS, shortens it up quite a bit. We are a national hub for advanced study and research in public policy and public administration. And we have this kind of way of describing ourselves. We're two campuses, one school. So we stretch across Saskatoon and Regina. And so we live in both places. And that kind of shared identity is a reflection of the spirit of cooperation and collaboration that's, I think, in some ways defines this province, at least historically. Since our inception in 2007, I'd say it's fair to say we've become one of Canada's leading public policy schools for educating graduate students and public service servants interested in and devoted to advancing public value and that spirit of collaboration and cooperation. Now, it's customary at this time, and appropriately so, to acknowledge that our event takes place on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories. That's the two schools. These are the original lands of the Cree, the Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. And it's also the traditional homeland of the Métis. But I want to move a little bit beyond that's kind of performative land acknowledgement. I want to share with you a short meditation by the late, great Ojibwe author Richard Wagamese. Now, Wagamese is from northwestern Ontario, about midway between Sault Ste. Marie, where Shannon's from, and Saskatoon here. At a young age, he was separated from his family and became a ward of the state, moving in and out of foster homes. And once he reached adulthood, he lived a very hard life. And his chief solace was the library and books and literature. And in Embers, this book of meditations, one of his meditations speaks to the conversation I expect we're about to have. And if I might venture to say, it also speaks to the purpose of this school. So I'm just going to read this meditation, and I'd ask you to just sit with it for a minute. So knowledge is not wisdom, but wisdom is knowledge in action. I've lived most of my years immersed in the culture of books. I command a lot of facts. I comprehend a lot of concepts, but that does not make me wise or intelligent. It just indicates that I've memorized things. But when I activate those facts and concepts to find the grandest version of myself and then use them to work towards that version, I begin the process of wisdom. And the most essential question to ask myself is not, what do I think about this, but rather, how do I feel about this? And in such simplicity is greatness made possible for an individual, a society like Canada, and a human family. So today's discussion is going to focus on this question of putting together knowledge into action in some ways, right? And perhaps even asking, maybe at the end we can talk about this, if Mark Carney is governed with wisdom in his first year. Does he move from this place of intertwined knowledge, feeling, purpose towards wisdom? And I'm going to leave you to think about that as we move through the conversation. One thing that wise people know and that I struggle with is, that might say something about me, is that process and procedure matter. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes going through the tedious matters that are going to govern the rest of this conversation. So please ensure your cell phones are off, muted, otherwise. You have exits if you're physically here. You have exits out there and here if you need to get out. And just around the corner, there is an exit to the outside. You may run into a smoker there, but just push past them and you'll be fine. If you require assistance, there's some helpful JSGS staff floating around here. And they can be identified by their JSGS name tags. And I believe online there's assistance as well. And the format for today's event is going to be as follows. Following some introductions, we'll start the discussion with a moderated question and answer period, maybe about 45 minutes, give or take, we're going to see. And then we're going to give you some time to ask your questions. So, as you're listening to us discuss, please come up with your questions. And if you have a question in the room, there's a microphone there. Just kind of line up, and I'll call on you when the time is appropriate. And for those of you who are online, please email your questions to jsgs.events@uregina.ca, and they'll be sent to me, and I'll ask them on your behalf as the moment arises. After we wrap up the discussion, for those of you who are here in person, you're welcome to join us and encouraged to join us for reception just out here. And if you have any logistical questions during today's event, please don't hesitate to send a message to Karen Jaster Laforge via Zoom's chat, or email her, I don't know if people are getting this, but at jsgs.events@uregina.ca. You'll be able to find Karen's contact information in the chat. Okay, so this event is going to be recorded and will be available for viewing at the JSGS website at a later date. Now, logistics are out of the way. I'm going to introduce you. Oh, no. Yes, I am. I'm going to introduce you to our speaker. So over the last 24 hours, I've gotten to know Shannon just a little bit, and I found out that, like me, she is a proud citizen. Origin story is from Northern Ontario. Her hometown is Sault Ste. Marie, in the heart of Robinson-Huron Treaty area. And I think fair to say, like much of Western Canada, people from our part of the world share a sense of being outsiders and observing where decisions are made and how they shape our lives. But now Shannon lives in the beating heart of federal decision-making, right, in Ottawa, where she works as a feature writer on federal politics and public policy for the Globe and Mail's Ottawa Bureau. She's also a regular on CBC's Power and Politics. Now, Shannon describes her work as focused on the messy human parts of politics, that difference between what political actors say and what they mean, and these hidden undercurrents that are motivating them. In her Globe and Mail bio, she also describes herself as always on the lookout for the weird, as someone who's prone to picking up whatever gets left on the cutting room floor. And I hope in our conversations we can pick up some of those threads as we move forward. Before joining the Globe, Shannon was the Ottawa Bureau Chief of Maclean's Magazine, and also worked as a staff writer at Sportnet Magazine, Post Media, and the Ottawa Citizen. Now, fun fact about Shannon, she believes The Golden Girls is the greatest TV show ever made. Yeah, okay, see, people know what that means. I'm going to confess, I have not watched the show once. So I really don't, yeah, I know, boo, I know. Yeah, this is a really bad start. I'm sorry, Shannon. But, it's kind of like a little fun exercise for those of you who know about the Golden Girls. I'd be really interested if you want to vocalize, like, do you observe that emerging through Shannon? Does that zeitgeist come out through her discourse? I'd like to know. So anyway, with that, I'd like to welcome Shannon to the stage, and welcome to Saskatoon. Okay, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's
Yeah,
nice to be here.
it's
Even
great.
though you haven't watched The Golden Girls, and that's inexcusable.
Forgive me, Shannon, but I'm from Northern Ontario, so all is forgiven, right? So I want to start in a place, like a very general place. Earlier, you were saying, we had this little chat, and you were saying, Donald Trump runs through the whole conversation, right? When we're thinking Mark Carney, it's like everything is filtered through that lens. And I want to start with this conversation because last year at this time, Mark Carney wasn't even the prime minister. It wasn't even the Liberal leader yet. Yeah. And so there's like a lot has happened in the last year. And then going into that election, I have this distinct memory of Pierre Poilievre saying, new leader, but same team. Nothing's going to change. It's the same, so why would you vote for more of the same? We just had overwhelmingly people telling us they didn't want Trudeau government. So, what's on offer here is not really much different. So can you reflect on what's happened over the last year and how does that Carney, just in a very, yeah, that's a pretty big question. But was Pierre Poilievre right? Like, let's start there. Was he right that nothing has changed or would change? Or do you think that something has actually changed, and what is it? And how does Carney or Trump shape that change?
I'd point out that Pierre Poilievre doesn't say that anymore because it just wasn't sticking. You can always tell because he has such strong message discipline. When he trots a line out for a while and then drops it, it's because it's not landing. I'm laughing because like the last year has been so exhausting and so eventful, and it's not going to end. But so much has changed. Like I feel like what we've all learned is some basic humility, that we never really know what's going to happen next. I think I told you when we were talking before this, I had an argument. Argument is too heavy a word. A light debate, a polite collegial debate with a copy editor about 18 months ago. Like, because by this time last year, a lot had shifted. But if you back up to sort of the fall of 2024, I had written something in a column about, a declarative sentence, Pierre Poilievre will be the next prime minister, blah, blah, blah. And the copy editor said, well, like, we don't really know that's going to happen. And I was like, but we kind of do, right? Like 20 points ahead, we know where this is going. I will eat humble pie. I will never again assume I know what's going to happen next, because everything has been upended. But yeah, I think Trump is the lens through which you have to look at all of this. I think there's a really, really strong argument to be made that without Trump, without this incarnation of Trump, which is really different from Trump 1, Mark Carney is not Liberal leader. He is not prime minister. None of this where it is now, it would be where it is. It was sort of an almost bizarre collision of like man and moment. I wrote a profile of Carney during the election, and that was sort of the thrust of it, was you could not actually, I, with great pride, and I will use a polite euphemism for the word, I got the F-bomb into the Globe and Mail because in the lead, because someone had told me, Carney on one of his flights with the reporters told them that Jean Charest said to him, you're the luckiest effing guy in Canadian political history, which to me sums up all of it. The timing, that's not to say he hasn't made the most of the opportunity. I think he has in really interesting ways, but he had the bio he had the aura he had the CV and the skills that fit so perfectly this moment, and it's turned everything upside down.
So just tell me a bit about that article. I didn't realize you'd written this profile. Does it stand up? Like, what did you learn there? And does it stand up as it served you well in thinking about how
absolutely.
How the
I refer to it all the time because it was, again, like the nature of what I generally write when I do longer pieces is very human focused. So it was about trying to understand what makes Mark Carney tick. One of the questions I started out with a lot of people, which again is sort of bizarre to think now because I feel like we know so much about him now, but a year ago, there was the reputation that preceded him. But the question I started out with a lot of people was, is this guy for real? Like, people talk about him like he walks on water, like he's the smartest man who ever bestrode Canada. And I had all different ways of talking to people about this, people who knew him in different stripes. But it has served me really well, I think, and I hope the readers who read it, I'm sure you'll get to it as soon as we finish here.
Right after I watch Golden Girls.
Yeah, exactly. I would prioritize Golden Girls first. Understanding how he operates, or attempting to understand how he operates, how his mind works, I feel has been really instructive for the last year because there's such a different quality to this government than there was to the Trudeau government, and so much of it seems driven by Carney's approach to things. It's been really helpful and interesting to watch him learn to be a politician in front of us in real time.
So what are those building blocks? Like, what are those essential, not to psychologize too much.
No,
that's
what I do, 3,000 words at a time. One of the things, I mean, pretty much everyone, this sounds like hagiography, but it's the truth. Everyone you talk to who spent any amount of time with Carney will comment on how smart the guy is. He's a really bright dude. He has other weaknesses, other faults, but he's incredibly smart. But there's a particular quality that a lot of people unpacked for me that I found really interesting in his intelligence, which is that it's a very distilling quality. People talked about, say, at the Bank of Canada. I found this really interesting about the culture of the Bank of Canada. He didn't originate this, but they had a structure in meetings where the most junior deputy governors would speak first, and they would go up the order of hierarchy, and so that the governor would speak last. And it was a way of making sure that maybe more easily intimidated personalities or roles were not cowed, that they could say what they needed to say, and then you go up the hierarchy. But they said, because he also had a reputation both at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. In England, because Brits are better at language than we are, they called it getting tasered when he would just ask really, really harsh questions. Like that intelligence and that sifting quality can cut negative. It can be very cutting if he felt someone wasn't prepared. But everyone talked about his ability to make connections. Like someone said, he's not really an original thinker, like he's no slouch, but he's not sort of a pie in the sky guy. It's that he can listen to a room or listen to a bunch of stakeholders or whatever. And I think this has been really germane this year, and sift through what's most important, make connections between things, be very strategic. And I think that's one of the most essential qualities we've seen from him this year. And I think where it's going to come up a lot in our conversation is a sense of strategy, a sense of how do I move the ball forward? What is the end goal and what are the ways I can get there?
So a big part of what Carney is trying to do is move a lot of things fast, ostensibly,
Really
right?
big things.
Really big
fast.
things. So there's a few threads I want to pick up on that. But before I lose this one, you talked about his decision-making style, his synthesis capacity. And what we see sometimes from the, reading the news is that some of the bureaucrats are a little bit intimidated by him. Maybe a little bit, he can be an intense person with those probing questions. How is the bureaucracy react? And this is a public policy.
Sure.
How are people reacting within the bureaucracy towards him? And then maybe broaden out your answer to think about how he's trying to reform the civil service.
Yeah. I mean, here I will fully admit I defer to Catherine May, who's been covering the public service very ably in Ottawa for 30 years. So I just read her column and I will regurgitate to you what she has told me because she knows. I think there's been a real sense of sort of ruffled feathers, some nerves. Most obviously there's the cutbacks that they're talking about, I think they're aiming for 5% across the board, and that those notices are starting to roll out now. So in Ottawa, it's not, although I was telling you when we were out for dinner, like Ottawa is not as much a government town as you might assume socially. Like if you go to a party, it's a thing. A certain percentage of people work there, but it just permeates the city. It certainly permeates the weird little fishbowl I live in, right? So there is a sense of nerves, of people being rattled. Anytime there are cutbacks, that happens. But I think maybe what's more mechanical is the way, and again, Catherine May has said this, he's attempting to reform the public service without reforming it. Reforming it would be going through it methodically and figuring out what programs you want to cut or reduce and whether you're hitting goals. And like, it would be, I think of it as like the analogy of like the long version of like cleaning a room where you pull everything out and make a big mess in the middle of the room and then you put everything back. But the point there is that takes a really long time. And he's been very clear that speed is of the essence. So what he has done instead, there's been this really ruthless declaring of priorities. Ruthless sounds a bit more negative than I mean it to be, but I mean this very surgical declaring of priorities. Where with the Trudeau government, they published everyone's mandate letters and it was like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Everyone had 20 priorities on 20 different ministry lists. And I would argue if you say that everything is a priority, you've effectively declared nothing to be a priority, that you're giving your attention to everything at once. Whereas with Carney, it was a common mandate letter, 7 items. This is what we're doing. Figure out how your project fits into this and let us know. But the way that they have pursued that in a policy way is quite unique to him, I think, where they've bolted on these agencies to the public service that are often run by heavy hitters from the private sector because those are the people he knows. So there's Build Canada Homes, there's the Major Projects Office, there's the Defense Industrial Strategy is the policy, but I forget what the body is called that's doing that, where he's just bolted them on. And it seems to be his way of doing an end run around. It seems to be a declaration that he doesn't think he's going to be able to make the public service do enough things fast. Sabia, when he was named clerk, like famously came out with that letter that was like, we want you to worry less about compliance, we want you to be less risk averse. We want you to just get stuff done. And that is not generally the way the public service in Ottawa operates. Mm-hmm. What I think is super interesting is the verdict we're going to get at the end of this. Either Carney's right, and what was needed was just someone of sufficient sort of muscle and ambition to like crack the whip and make things go faster, or it's also possible he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And that in like 6 years, we're going to have like 5 Arrive Can stories that my kind will be feasting on. Like, I don't know which way that's going to go, but there's sort of 2 interesting possibilities there. Yeah,
though that's really interesting. It's almost like he's building a room around the room.
Yeah,
I'm not going to clean up this room. I'm going to build a room around the room, and hopefully the kids will get the message, right? Yeah. Clean your room. So when you were studying Carney and you're writing this kind of feature about him, I don't know if did you have a chance to go through Values, the book?
I've tried. It's one of my guilty admissions. I've read certain sections. I've tried. It's dense going. Yeah. Believe me, I want to. I just haven't gotten there yet.
Well, I'm just asking because I think in that book he kind of leans into market mechanisms. I think it's fair to say, and the climate issue is kind of a driving theme through a lot of the book, and
that's who he was, right? That was pre-politics, Mark Carney. That's what his deal was.
Right. But is he still that guy? Is he still that guy who cares about the climate as a kind of overarching issue?
It's a great question. It's actually the thing I would most like to ask him if I got time with him. And not in, I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice or just not a favor. The Ottawa Press Pack, when we get time with them at press conferences, it's very limited. It's like 4 questions, no follow-ups. It induces a scarcity mindset where we end up just baying things at them that are very reductive. And I understand why we're doing that. I'm not dumping on my colleagues, but it doesn't really invite good, thoughtful answers because it's inherently defensive. And so the version of that question you get in a press conference is, well, aren't you a hypocrite? Because here you are offering Danielle Smith a pipeline, or you're getting rid of the carbon tax, or you're doing this, or you're doing that. What happened to values, guy?
Right.
But I would actually like to ask that in a more open-ended way. Like, what happened? Like, what is the calculation here? Because the other argument he was making pre-politics when he was with Brookfield and I'm forgetting the name of the other, when he was like the climate finance guy.
Yes.
Was just a very pragmatic one, which was just, look, the money is going into green power. Like, whether you like it or not, the money is not in fossil fuels. It was a very practical follow the money kind of argument, which seemed very persuasive and kind of nuts and bolts in that moment. And I'm wondering what he thinks is the case now.
Right.
Like, I suspect he's making, and I don't mean to sound like an apologist, like I suspect he's making a very pragmatic calculation about, we need to shore up our economy. We needed to do it even before Trump started blasting a hole into the middle of it. We really do now. We need to sell more of our stuff. We need to sell it to more people because the next door neighbors have lost their minds. And so that's what we're going to do. And we'll deal with the next step next. But I don't know what internal calculation he's made about that.
Right. No, I think that's entirely fair. And the reason that kind of this is so intriguing, I think, is because the carbon tax was the economist's solution to climate change, right? Like, this was the consensus solution. There was even an eco-fiscal commission that was weighing in on this in a very strong way. And it kind of emerges even in his book, and yet it's gone. And I'm wondering what the economist in him is saying to himself, right? Yeah. Part of the argument could be, you know what, panels costs and other costs have come down so much, we don't need this such anymore. But actually, I want to pivot from this a little bit to the Western Canada context, because you mentioned, dropping the carbon tax, the pipelines, the MOU with Alberta. We got canola flowing back into China. There's the Port of Churchill. There's things going on with BC. It sort of looks like there's been a pivot back to that original question, like, what's changed? Mm-hmm. Under Trudeau, there was a sense of resistance, east-west.
That's putting it mildly.
There's a lot less Trudeau, Carney flags than I used to see.
Although they did instantly print up the flags and the hats with the same font. It was like a real demonstration of late stage capitalism.
But I'm just kind of curious, how do you explain that pivot? The kind of looks like a Western Canadian pivot, doesn't have a huge amount of support in Alberta, Saskatchewan. I mean, none. No, it's not entirely true, but close to none in these provinces. What do you think he's doing there? Is there a political calculation, or is it purely a national unity question, or what is it?
I don't suspect it's a political calculation, as in maybe we'll pick up some seats. I don't think it's anything that mechanical. I think some of it is pragmatism. And whenever I say that, I feel like I am making Mark Carney's own political ad for him, because he says he's pragmatic all the time. Except I think it does explain a lot. I do think a major part of the project right now is sell more of our stuff to more people, shore things up. This moment is so remarkable because, as I had argued to you, like Trump is the highway along which all of this stuff travels. But what Carney was promising to do, his essential offer during the election and even now, was like, I joked in a column that it was like he was telling Canada he was going to help us lose that 10 pounds. Like, that 10 pounds, like, we all know we should drop it. And like, if we ate less cheese and went to the gym, like, we would. But hard things are hard, and there's a reason we haven't done them. And here was this guy who had never done politics before, who was like, you know what? I'm going to help you guys drop that 10 pounds. And we're going to do it while the crazy man is menacing us from across the border. Like, that is a tall order. Like, there's sort of a remarkable, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but there's kind of a remarkable like conflict at the heart of all this, which is Carney still enjoys such high public confidence and said, in fact, it's rising. Like, we kept thinking, you sort of think like, okay, this is going to bump back down to earth at some point, but that's not the trajectory right now. But what he's promised to do are really, really difficult things to do. To turn around housing affordability, you would have to build a lot of houses really, really fast for a long time. I think the idea of tearing down interprovincial trade barriers, like all of that was so seductive. And I don't mean seductive in a duplicitous way. I think that is such an appealing idea. We can give ourselves more than any foreign country can take away, right? Like that was the slogan. That's so comforting. That's so appealing. That's so empowering in a moment where I think, I hope I'm not projecting, all of us felt so disempowered. We felt like, you realize like there's just such an asymmetry to the relationship with the US. When Trump started threatening us and it just kept escalating, you feel like there's nothing you can do. And here's this guy saying, you know what, there's some stuff we can do. But I think the reality is we're never going to be able to fill in those craters, no matter how successful all of those processes are. And then on top of that, you're talking about what a lot of people call an affordability crisis. Like there are real problems with affording life in this country. So it's remarkable to me that he enjoys such enormous public confidence still, and the things he's trying to tackle for us. Like I would not want that to-do list. I would find that to-do list horrifying. And the verdict is still out on how that goes. I just think it's too early to even mark the progress on it because these things it's like turning around to avoid an iceberg.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to say I have a child who's obsessed with Titanic. So that like reference is like very front of mind all the time. Anyway.
I thought you were going to work in more Golden Girl references.
It's too limited for the audience.
Okay. Yeah, it's a really kind of interesting dilemma you kind of raised there because he's saying, well, here are the big things, not quick things that we can do.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, back to Western Canada, like the idea of, I think one of the huge shifts there was that became a culture war with Trudeau, right? It was oil and gas bad, get on board with climate or you're bad. I mean, I'm being very reductive about it, but that's what it became by the end. Right. And then the opposition from people like Danielle Smith, like in response. And Carney, to me, although I don't know how successful this feels to Western Canadians, and I acknowledge that I live right within the Ottawa bubble, has kind of just sidelined all that. It's like, we're not having a values judgment here. We need to sell more of our stuff. How do we sell it? But, the MOU has enough asterisks on it that you could drive a truck through them. There's a lot of if-then clauses there that I think a lot of people thought, I don't know, it's a good question. Like, can you fulfill the conditions to make the thing happen? Can you find a buyer? But I think all of that does go back to pragmatism, that he's trying to sell more stuff. He's trying to shore up the economy. And he probably doesn't want to have massive fights with premiers. But the question is how much he can bring people on side and keep them on side. I always thought the major projects list, like, I don't know how that landed out here, but in Ottawa, it had this feel like, it felt like, I don't know, like The Price is Right or something, like maybe because like I feel like we all live in a Donald Trump game show and it's awful. Like it had this feel of like, here's the showcase showdown, because we were waiting because we're nerds and we were like, where's the first tranche? Because that's a word that normal people use in conversation now because of Mark Carney. Thanks, buddy. When the first list, I think, was 5 to start with and then 5 more. And that was, in a sense, a shopping list. And I always thought, well, that's where he's going to get into trouble with the premiers. That's where everyone is going to stop sitting around the first minister's table, purring in his direction, because then some people get what they want and some people don't. But we haven't seen that yet. There was sort of a moment of fracturing, I think, right around Christmas, where some people were feeling, some provinces were feeling thrown under the bus with the US and others were feeling protected. So I keep thinking there's going to come a moment when he's going to start pissing people off, but pardon my language, but we haven't gotten there yet. Like there's still this feeling of everything kind of floating in the ether.
If Trump goes away tomorrow, does that hold? Like, does he get the float? Or does that, back to your core theme?
I just need to dwell in the warm, soft taste for a second, thinking about, could that be like 5 seconds where we just kind of go,
yes.
Anyway, sorry for being distracted by that beautiful image. It's a really interesting idea. I would strongly suspect, because we kind of saw it during the election, right? Like, to me, the story of the election was 2 elections being fought in parallel. And one of them was more salient for like 4 of those 6 weeks or 5 weeks or however long it was. And it was the Trump question. Like we always talk about the ballot question, right? Like what are the grounds on which we're fighting this thing? And there were 2 of those. And for, a year before this time last year, the ballot question was affordability. Is your life worse under the Trudeau Liberals than it was before? Yes, Pierre Poilievre is here for you. Off we go. Like there was no question that was winning the public conversation. And then by the time we got to this point last year, the Trump question, like to me, it's like a cloud that blotted out the sun. Like again, I allow for the fact that like I live among weird people and all of my friends are journalists, fine. But like my mom, like on a day when there was a tariff announcement, would have CBC on all day watching it. Like it was an all day news event. Like if we can kind of rewind our brains to that level of urgency this time last year. So the election was like, we had that election for about 4 weeks. And then I think in the final 10 days, you could see the other election reasserting itself. Trump went a little bit quiet. It became less front of mind for people. We went back to kind of the question of affordability and is your life better? And the Conservatives started to pull ahead. There's a lot of people, and like I would count myself among them, that think if that campaign was 1 week longer, it would have ended very differently. And so to me, the question is now, which election or which conversation are we having? Because the other one is still waiting there, right? When people can't buy a house unless their parents are rich enough to give them the down payment, or when normal people are like wincing at their grocery bills, it's really hard for that not to be really, really relevant and salient. Right. So,
and meanwhile, you have these kind of promises of these abstractions. We're going to do big things. We're going to get rid of interprovincial barriers that people can't touch and feel in the same way that they can cost of living, right?
Yeah, I always thought that presented a tricky political comms problem.
Right.
Even the idea of major projects or beefing up the economy, I'm not sure. It seems to me like a lot of steps to explain to people, and this is how that will make your life better. Like a mine here, unless you're in that community or very close to it, in which case the story is obvious. But if you're trying to tell 40 million people building these 10 projects that were already being built, is like the thing we asked a lot of questions about and didn't really get great answers to, but whatever. Like building these 10 projects, like how is that rising tide lifting my boat? I think is a really tricky political comms question because there's a lot of dotted lines there.
Exactly.
And same thing with interprovincial trade or these other things. They're all things that of course we should fix them. Just like the idea of reorienting away from being super dependent on the United States for trade. Like of course it was probably, I don't know, maybe it wasn't a great idea to be over-reliant, or maybe it makes sense when you have like a giant with an eating disorder next door that you just sell it all your stuff. Like, of course you do. But look what happens when the giant loses his mind.
Right. So a lot of this is, and you made this really interesting comment about Carney, the politician, learning on the job. Mm-hmm. What do you think he's learned? Do you think he's kind of absorbed this idea of Trump as a shield almost, right? Like, is that... You know, how do you see him thinking about this?
I find it so interesting. I find it I pay way too much attention to the way he speaks specifically because, and I know there's a world in which that could be style over substance, but with him, I find it's usually not. There's not a lot of empty calories there. Like my very mean joke is that you could have like installed a phone booth on Spark Street that would just be a direct bat phone to Justin Trudeau. And at any hour of the day or night, a Canadian could call and make him talk to them. But if you listened for 2 hours, you would still never learn anything concrete because you would just get a bunch of value statements. And it was really frustrating as reporters to ask mechanical questions about, Mr. Prime Minister, you've announced this policy and you say it's going to do X, but what if it does Y, or what if it makes this worse? And then you would get, well, we will always stand up for people. And it just was not an answer to the question asked. Carney is super not that, like super, super not that. We do not talk about values. We do not talk about what we stand up for. We don't talk about like the softer side of things. We talk about nuts and bolts, which is really interesting. But because he's so precise in the way he talks, I find... what he says and what he doesn't very telling. Like what he will answer or what he just boxes off feels meaningful. And so like you had that infamous moment back in the spring where my colleague Stephanie Levitz, everybody always forgets her part of the story, and then Rosemary Barton were pushing him on like, well, your assets are in a blind trust, but obviously you knew what they were, so like what are they? And he got really shirty with both of them and was really quite rude and condescending. And I think like my interpretation of that moment is that he didn't get the rules of the game yet. I think he thought that moment was about impugning his personal integrity, and he really did not like that, as a lot of us would not, where he didn't understand that, no, you're in a new world where we ask all those questions. Like that is just the way this goes. You might think you are above reproach and you might be annoyed that we can't see that, but that's the way this goes. And he hasn't taken that tone again. Like somebody, either he figured it out or someone slapped that out of his hand. He's turned out to be, I think, a much better retail politician than anyone expected. This time last year, the two big knocks were, he's a technocrat. He's going to be like boring and dry. He's pretty witty. And like the wit gets him pretty far. Like it really does. And we also thought, his French sucks, like that's disqualifying. His French kind of does suck, not as bad as we thought. He doesn't use it a lot. Radio Canada had an investigation like maybe 6 months ago where they quantified it. And I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20% of his speech is in French. And like no one cared. It was a story for like 3 days. And then everyone was like, well, whatever, that's just not what we're like. It's just, we're in this very strange moment where a lot of things that would normally matter, would normally be a big deal, are just not, because people have said, I think the implication is like, we can't solve the Trump problem. And this is terrifying because like, I personally feel like I've lost my ability to calibrate, like just as a Canadian, like the worst case scenario. Like, I don't know, like, do you know how you normally have a sense of like, well, this is the worst thing that could happen. Like, I don't have that floor anymore. I don't know about the rest of you. Like rolling tanks across the border, sure, seems totally possible. And so in a world like that, and like even the less dramatic version of that is he rips up Kuzma, like he destroys our economy because we sell like 75% of our stuff to them. We can't really fix any of that, or we can't fix it fast enough for it to not really hurt. And it seems to me like the public reaction then has been, we don't know what to do about this, but you, Mr. Bankerman, seem to know, so go for it.
Yeah, dad'll take us out of the woods,
totally.
Kind of thing. Yeah,
finance daddy,
yeah,
right?
Finance
Remember that?
dad.
That was a weird moment.
Dad who's very focused on...
Honestly, like I have to tell you, like during the election, like going to his rallies, it was like being at a World Juniors game. Like it was like everyone was wearing red and white, like literally wrapping themselves in the flag, because like they were trading so much on that like nationalism moment, right? They also had, I can't remember if I ended up writing this, but I loved it. Like, I love the growth, like the stage management of politics. Like, it's just my favorite thing. Like when you would see at his rallies, there'd be always a kid with a hockey stick with a Canadian flag on it. Yeah, those were on the campaign buses and they would hand them out when we got to a thing, which is like fine. Everyone does it. But it was like, oh, it's not just like a kid with a hockey stick. Like this isn't organic. But also like you really haven't lived until you've seen someone like launch themselves at Mark Carney holding the 600-page values book and ask him to sign it like they're at a Beatles concert. Like that was like really something else, let me tell you.
I can't let this go, Shannon, because you've insisted on his like very pragmatic. He's not Justin Trudeau. He's the way he answers that phone from the Spark Street. Spark Street, by the way, is about a block south of Parliament Hill. Right?
Yeah. And it's like where CBC is. Like it's very institutional.
And it's a walkable street. It's not a drivey seat.
Yeah.
What a pedestrian street.
Pedestrian street. It's like it's one of Ottawa's great missed opportunities because it's like a graveyard and it should be like restaurants and festivals and stuff.
We could have a long conversation about that.
Sure. Yes. But would you like to talk about the Ottawa train? I have deep emotional damage.
In Saskatchewan, that would be
great.
Sure. But the book was called Values.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like this
I know.
Kind of really weird.
Well,
and then you just brought it up again. People bringing the book to get signed, and it's like, how do you square that?
Well, I'm not suggesting he's valueless at all. At all. I think when your values can be pragmatism, right? Your value can be, look, we need to just get stuff done. Like we need to fix this economy with its lagging productivity. And like, that's a value. I'm just saying, I guess I'm talking about it very much in a communications way or in the way that my kind deal with him, that I really appreciate that if we ask a mechanical question, we get a mechanical answer. I like that. That to me feels more like transparency than someone using like a values sermon as a shield, because it wasn't an answer. It was a way to fend us off. It was a way to remind us of what kind of people they were and that we should stop asking rude questions.
I mean, that's so interesting because one of my research areas is central banking, and the kind of transparency has been a kind of mantra for the last 30 years in the way they communicate out. Like we're going to explain to you the logic of our decision.
Yeah,
and
it's fascinating, right? When they do the notes of their meetings and stuff like that. It's fascinating.
Yeah. But
everyone should do that all the time. They should all tell us what they say.
It's a really interesting public policy lens, to bring to a large range of issues, not just monetary policy. But I do want to lean into this pragmatism thing because I also, coming back to the West, how would you characterize his relationship with Daniel Smith and like Scott Moe and, the premiers in general, like and even Doug Ford, the bromance thing?
Well, they're friends again. They went through a little rough patch, but somebody brought someone roses and it's good again. It looks like he's been much more successful in building a good relationship with Mo than with Daniel Smith. Mo's going to India with him. He sounds quite pleased about what that could mean for ag. That's all good. Danielle Smith is a tricky one, right? Because she's sort of like, she's such a distinctive entity. Like there was that moment when they signed the MOU. And that was, I think that was not inconsequential for federal politics. Like Stephen Guilbeault walked out of cabinet, not out of caucus, but walked out of cabinet. There's been a sense at certain moments that openness to a pipeline or whatever version of that could upset. Like there was a moment in the fall, remember, where a few Liberal MPs established a climate caucus, and there was sort of this sense of like a little bubbling, like, ooh, maybe he's going to have trouble like within the tent now, and then it just kind of like went away. Which I think a lot of that is like, I used to write sports, and like in sports you say like winning is great deodorant. Like no one stinks when you're in the winning dressing room, and I think there's a lot of that going on. As long as you're still playing from a position of strength, you can quell a lot of uprising from within. I think Poilievre is the other side of that coin right now. But I think, again, like it's hard to explain. Like we've never seen a first ministers meeting like they had. I actually forget when it was, but the first one he had with them where they were like purring and like swaying from side to side, and everyone was happy. And like I can only, like I think about a lot of things through a psychological lens. I can only think that the premiers were having somewhat of the same reaction we were as private citizens, which was, this is really bad and I don't know what to do about it. So like, what are we going to do about it together? Because there's no partisan reason for the alignment. I mean, there are interesting partisan kind of currents under the surface in that a lot of provincial conservatives don't get along with Poilievre and his crew. So there's not the usual alignment there that would box out Carney. In fact, sometimes it is very spitefully and obviously the opposite of like, I will take you to prom because it'll make him mad kind of thing. So, but there's been this really strange, like kind of cats marrying dogs quality to things with Carney all along. And I think that extends to the relationship with the premiers.
So I found out just before we started here that Shannon has 4 cats, and I'm hearing all these cat references, Shannon, now. Purring, cats and dogs, scratching.
One more though.
Yeah, okay.
I think there's like a super feline
Is he a cat guy?
Carney.
Oh, yeah.
He is a cat guy, but I just mean like his presence. Like you watch him like in the Oval Office, my God. I have no poker face, and I really appreciate having a prime minister with no poker face, because like my stock in trade is like body language, facial expression. He gives me a lot to work with. It's a lot of fun. So like you watch him when he's in the Oval or when he's in a very fraught situation, and it's all there. Like I find him very watchful, but like imagine sitting and listening to Donald Trump just bray about what's what when you're an economist. Like,
yeah, I want to ask you, how did he seems practiced at this. Like, is he good at that? Or do you think he learned?
Like, sometimes it makes me nervous because he likes to wink. He has like, do you guys know about like the winking problem? Like, it's a thing, right? The winking problem. He winks a lot. And sometimes I sort of think like, oh, like if Trump saw you, like he could lose it and like, I don't know, like jack up steel tariffs to like 80% or something because he's mad. But we're in such a weird moment where things that are maybe like practically ill-advised are very emotionally satisfying. I just saw this afternoon, CP had a story on the State of the Union last night, which, because I hate myself, I watched all of it. And they had a story about it, and there was a single line. Carney said he did not watch the speech. And I was like, ooh, that should have had a little flame emoji beside it. And like, that's maybe not great for just like knowing what the lay of the land is, but also that's kind of spicy.
Yeah. So you referenced sports, and I think Mark Carney used to be a hockey player, a goalie.
This is my favorite thing though, because he doesn't have a goalie personality. The goalies are usually whack jobs. He's not a goalie. Like he's not, like I mean that in a loving way. Like the goalies are the weirdos. You have to be to withstand that kind of pressure.
Right.
He was a goalie, played for Harvard, but he doesn't have a goalie like persona. Anyway.
Okay, this is new on me. But okay, the sports. Have you learned? So you covered sports.
Yeah.
He had a bit of an athletic background. Do you see any of that bubbling, setting aside the goalie whack job thing? But do you see any of that emerging in his governing style?
That's interesting. I mean, it feels a bit like cliche to say like I think he's very competitive. I think he's very strategic. I would attribute those qualities to an athlete. Actually, my favorite little tidbit I had in that profile of him, like I find a very resonant detail, even though it appears to have nothing to do with like policy making or politics. Someone who knew him quite well told me like, he runs a lot, right? He's a renowned, like really, really heavy duty runner. He's run marathons and stuff. I'm sure he doesn't have time for it anymore. And he doesn't play hockey anymore. But someone said part of his thinking, he had explicitly told this to them, part of his thinking in running a lot, being very fit, he's very careful about what he eats, is that he wanted to have this high-flying career. Like, this is before politics. This is like when he was a central bank governor, where you're flying a lot, you're working long hours. It's crazy. It's very demanding. And he thought, in order to operate at that level, I need to be very physically fit and be looking after myself. I find that really interesting on a human level. Like, to me, that is an extremely strategic way of thinking, of being in the world. Like, it's a way bigger version of, I have a big day at work tomorrow, I better not go to bed at midnight. I found that illustrative of the way a brain works.
It's very intentional. And,
very
and
intentional.
Strategic.
They also said they would know he was like at the end of his rope if they saw him eating crap. Like, if he was like eating Doritos or something, they were like, well, boss is having a bad day.
That's the
Which
tell.
I love that kind of stuff.
That's the tell. Just coming back to the West a little bit. So he's got this, burgeoning relationship with Scott Moe, maybe a little iffy with Danielle Smith, and
hard to know.
We don't know. But do you have a sense that he has a vision for federalism, right? So traditionally liberals were seen as like a strong central government, and the conservatives a little more like not that. Does he, and some people have characterized him as a red Tory of sorts, right?
For sure.
How do you think he thinks about this question of more power to Ottawa versus the provinces?
It's interesting. He's an Alberta guy, so presumably has some inherent understanding of the feeling of Western alienation. There was some reporting from Politico, I think it was right after the MOU, that he went into a caucus meeting and sort of like he knew he would have to address the issue of the MOU and the compromises therein, but that he got quite emotional, which he doesn't often. That's not a register he hits a lot, saying Alberta has to know they're wanted. Like, they have to know we want them in. So he seems very alive to how big a problem that could be into tamping it down. He seems to me to have a little bit more of a, I don't know if laissez-faire is the right expression, but like, again, that pragmatism idea of, okay, if you want this, if this will make you happy or this will help your population, if we can make that happen, like, he thinks of himself as a deal maker, right? And it's apparent that's like, it was kind of amazing for a while where he would go into meetings that you would expect to be very fractious with someone like Trump or Danielle Smith or whatever, and they would come out all smiles. I'm deliberately not saying purring this time, or you're going to call me out on it. If you're a deal maker, then it's sort of the opposite of Trump, right? Because Trump presents himself as a deal maker, but it's not about making deals. It's about operating from a position of strength, like a mob boss, and then just having other people live with it. It's just like, here is what I have, here's my hand. Whereas I think Carney operates more from a win for you, a win for me, gets us both to move things forward. And so to me, that seems to be a little bit more of I'm not suggesting at all that he doesn't have a strong interest in unity, because clearly that's a live issue right now in Canada, but that maybe there's room for a little bit more looseness in letting provinces feel like they can get what they need or what they want.
Right. Just to kind of stick to the Western theme a little bit, but pivoting. So Saskatchewan and Manitoba especially have significant Indigenous population. This was a major theme of the Trudeau government, at least rhetorically. And yet my sense is we hear a lot less about Indigenous issues and reconciliation than we did under Trudeau. Do you share that view? How does he thinking about the engagement with Indigenous communities? What are you seeing there?
We hear a lot less about it.
Yeah.
But I would just be cautious. I wouldn't want to suggest it's a thing he does not care about, like that it's an active choice, because we hear a lot less about a lot of things that, like, sort of social policy issues. They don't talk a lot about, like, status of women. I remember when they made that first cabinet, the one that lasted like 10 minutes before they called the election. Remember the one, like, he made a cabinet right after he was sworn in, just about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. I've joked, and I've actually, like, it's a joke that's going to come back to bite me, because I've said, like, asking someone like, who was the health minister between this date and March 2025 and this date would be like $1 million politics question, except I can't remember. Like, I don't know, because it lasted like 10 minutes. But anyway, when they made that cabinet, it was really, really small, right? It was a clear statement of, this is a lean, mean trade war fighting machine. It was like 20 people. And I remember seeing a news story where people were raising concerns like, why is there no status of women minister? Why is there no labor minister? And I remember thinking, oh, that's such an interesting take, because, and I don't mean to devalue that view at all, it was so obvious to me that this was a statement about, we're not doing that. Like, that's not what we're doing. We are doing brass tacks economic stuff,
Right.
and that's it.
Yes.
And so that applies to Indigenous issues too. He doesn't talk about it a whole lot. It was a big issue last summer, after they passed C5, the major projects legislation, where they were going to accelerate things. And there was a lot of frustration from Indigenous groups and environmental groups that this constituted sort of an end run, that you were bypassing a bunch of things like permission structures that were supposed to be respected. And they had the First Nations Summit in Ottawa that he attended. I think it's noteworthy that they let us come in, like they let reporters come in for the opening statements and prayers, and then they kicked us out once they got to talking about actual issues. And I remember one of my colleagues reporting at the time that Indigenous groups did not like that. Like, they wanted us to stay and hear all the dirty laundry aired, and PMO was like, get out. So that's telling, like, that messiness. So that has been, for sure, one of the biggest friction points he's reached. Like, I remember thinking in the summer, he's been cruising along up to this point with everyone saying, like, go Mark, go, do it for us. And then all of a sudden it seemed like he was running smack into a very heterogeneous, but a group or a bunch of people, stakeholders, who were like, no, you don't, not so fast. But that hasn't seemed to have slowed things down. So it's certainly less of a preoccupation, but I think what you said is, like, rhetorically with the Trudeau government, I think it's an open question how much the rhetoric was matched with
Right.
action and progress. And so the fact that Carney doesn't talk about it as much is separate from what's actually being done, but we have seen signs of friction and frustration in how things have been done.
So just and this wasn't in my prepared questions, Shannon, but don't be worried. The other kind of big theme that Trudeau had coming in with his first cabinet was the gender issue.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's, what was it, 2015 or
2015.
Yeah.
This is 2015.
Because he had a half roughly
Yeah.
cabinet.
Yeah.
How's that one landing?
It's funny. I don't know if Carney's is gender equal. Does anyone know? No way. But that, again, is just a thing we're not, and I want to be, like, clear how I'm saying this. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. This is a descriptive thing of, this is just not, that's not the project right now. Not that we don't care about that stuff, but we're not going to talk about that stuff. And, like, I would argue, I mean, like, I care about all those issues, like, as we all should, about progress. But with the Trudeau government, it became such a shield and a deflection that I'm not sure the comparison to this moment is that unflattering to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because so much has been about a stripped down list of priorities. And these are the things we're focusing on, and these are the things we're not. And we're not going to hold our hands over our hearts and give a sermon about what we're about.
I mean, it's quite remarkable when you think about it, the pivot, right? Like, just how dramatically different
It's astonishing.
from the gender Indigenous perspective to it not being elevated.
Just none of your feelings. Like,
Right.
no, we're not doing feelings anymore. Like, I actually talked to him. The only time I've interviewed him one-on-one, it was ridiculous. During the playoffs last year, when the Oilers went all the way to the final, I knew he was an Oilers fan, and I just asked one of his press secretaries, sort of like, I said, can you just tell me on background, like, how is he watching the games these days? Like, give me some fun color, whatever. Like, he's the fan in chief. And they said, do you want to talk to me about it or him? And I was like, the second one, if it's an option, so sure. But, like, I could not, I just thought this was telling. I could not get him to tell me, like, tear-stained stories of watching the Oilers as a boy. I was like, so, like, where did you watch them? Do you have any really strong memories of playoffs when you were a kid? And he was like, no, just, in friends' basements, black and white TVs, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, sir, I'm offering you the chance to basically trot out Canadian political pornography by telling me about your sad little boy Mark cheering for the Oilers or triumphant. And we're not doing that. So that's just, we're not doing that right now.
And yet, with the Olympics, there were, at least I saw a clip, and I can't remember who it was, but there were 3 women. Did you see that clip where he had this really engaged, and he was just, he seemed very human, like excited, like a little kid.
Yep.
It was a really
Maybe it's us.
powerful.
Maybe it's my kind. He just, you know what it is? I think there's a particular quality to it that I actually respect. He doesn't seem to want to really trade on the personal stuff. Like, the family is out there minimally.
Yeah.
There was quite a bit, as there always is in the leadership race, like his personal bio as political fodder. I remember he launched in like an Edmonton arena, and this is where I learned values and blah, blah, blah. But trade on that a lot. Like, which again strikes me as a, like, we have stuff to do here. Like, who cares who I am and what bio I bring to this? We're doing the thing. Like, are we doing a good job or not?
So speaking as a dad, I know dads have weaknesses. What's Mark Carney's weakness? What's his
Well, I think there are a couple of possible things that could become political problems for him. I don't know if these are his weakness.
Right.
I mean, his personal weakness is, like, people talk about, like, that acerbic nature,
right.
Like the idea that he will cut you off at the knees if he thinks you're unprepared or you're not bringing good enough information to a meeting. And I think that's one of those things that people forgive and overlook when you're on the ascendancy and when you seem like the guy who knows what he's doing. And much like with Poilievre, that kind of stuff comes back to bite you when you're in a weakened state. Like, if you leave resentment and frustration behind you, people will swallow that when you seem like a ticket to something bigger. But when you no longer do, I think those things come back. So that could be. I think I could imagine a world in which, like, I keep thinking, because the Trudeau government was the first government that I personally have covered from cradle to grave, that I've been, like, there for the whole thing. And it really changed, especially because, like, it went so weird at the end. Like, it was so weird by, like, the fall when they did the grocery thing and they were like, and you get a turkey and you get a turkey. Yeah. Like, it was just like, what the hell is this? Like, they were just, like, coasting on fumes and it was so weird. But I could remember like, oh, like 10 years ago when we came out of the dour Harper years and people were tired of the severity and like this kind of mean quality. And Justin Trudeau showed up with his shirt sleeves rolled up, being professionally handsome, like juggling babies in crowds. And people were like, oh my God, what is this? Sign me up. And so, like, it was a pendulum swinging, right? We had a business-like, dour, kind of mean government, but people liked the competency for a while. And then after a while, they got tired of it. And then this guy shows up with the touchy-feelies and everyone's into it. And remember, it's weird to remember the early days of the Trudeau government, like when they went to one of the federal government buildings in Ottawa, like it was ISET or something, and he was applauded by scientists as though he had, like, ridden in on a white horse, which, anyway. But then you get, like, that eventually wears out its welcome. Eventually, 10 years later, the emoting and the values and the talking about how journalists are our friends and we believe in science and all that stuff that in 2015, 2016 was very refreshing and felt like a corrective to a thing people were tired of, by 2024 is, like, makes you gag. And so I keep thinking in a very, like, dark way, like, what are the Carney things that right now seem so interesting and kind of mesmerizing and, like, different that in, like, whatever time frame is reasonable will be super annoying.
And your short list would include that acerbic, maybe, personality.
And I think it would also be very easy for him to shade cocky. Like, he's a super, super competent and confident guy, big ego. I don't think it's a long trip from there to arrogance.
It can shade into that.
Governments tend to look arrogant, particularly liberals tend to look arrogant after a while. That makes sense to me.
So this is actually, and by the way, I want to encourage people to send me, put some questions online, because we're getting to the 45-minute mark.
Okay. Also the mic there for
There's a mic there. So if you want to stand up.
We won't limit you to one question with no follow-up.
No.
Ask as many as you like, in the service of democracy.
Well, can you speak to, and this is, I think, potentially another source of weakness, perhaps. So you've mentioned this kind of building this room around the room. That's my interpretation. The bringing in of outsiders who don't really maybe understand government in some way. Yeah. Can you speak to the team he's built around him, like the cabinet, and are there people that he, like his go-to people? Who's strong, who's not? Where do you see that? How do you think about the team around him?
It's an interesting question because it feels like a very centralized government. It feels like Mark Carney and the band. And the band is just the band. Like, his inner PMO circle is very bro-y. A lot of people have commented there's not a lot of women in the upper echelons there. It seems to me like he has just collected people around him that he's gotten to know, often in the private sector, because that's mostly where he's been. It's this very sort of cherry picking. You will be good for this job. You will be good for this job. I'm plugging you in to get a job done. And so we are seeing a lot of outsiders coming in, as I said, like these kind of bolt-on federal agencies. The cabinet, I'm trying to think, like, he has his go-tos, and for the most part, they like the ones that we see prominently out talking match the portfolios that are typically pretty high profile, foreign finance, industry. Those people are still front bench, although those were also Trudeau front benchers. But there's a different quality overall to it. It's a hard thing. It's kind of ephemeral, but because it feels so driven by him, driven by the personality of the leader, as the previous cabinet was, it does feel like it has a different quality.
Okay, so we do have a question from the online here, so I'm going to not going to be able to parse it, so I'm just going to read it to you.
Okay, this will be an adventure.
It's a long question. So what do you think about all the trade junkets that the premiers are taking, sometimes with the PM, sometimes on their own? Here in Saskatchewan, Scott Moe's on a trade junket constantly, but when you look at the results, Sask exports have fallen for 2 consecutive years. In the case of his trip to India today, Saskatchewan exports to India are down. I mean, I'm not going to vouch for these numbers, but let's say 43, 44%, and the farm portion of those exports are down almost 56%. Do you think the premiers have any real impact on increasing international trade?
That's a tough one. I don't know if this is quite answering that question, but it seems to me like all of those projects are longer term projects. You don't go on one trade mission generally and sign a deal and sell more stuff. Like it's about laying a foundation, building relationships, and reorienting ourselves away from the United States to other partners is a tricky long-term thing. Like, to me, there has always been a fundamental mismatch that we kind of don't talk about between the urgency of how fast we need to do it to avoid really bad stuff economically and how fast we're going to be able to do it. So I guess I'm sort of, I personally wouldn't be inclined to say like it's pointless, it hasn't accomplished anything yet, because I think it's a longer time horizon to accomplish something. It
just occurs to me, it's kind of interesting that I think this might be wrong, but my sense is historically governments did the trade thing more towards the end of their terms, like premiers or prime ministers, sorry. But this is like really front loaded, right? And he's traveling a lot.
And he's super externally oriented.
Right.
Someone just had a story last week in Ottawa, I forget who, adding up the days out of the country, and they said he doubled Trudeau's international travel days. But that is very Carney, right?
Right.
Very internationally oriented, which is also like another one of these strange, like cats marrying dogs. You're just gonna have to roll with it. I'm sorry. Things like we're focusing on things now that are not typically things that spark joy in Canada. Like, we have a defense industrial strategy, and we're going to spend like boatloads of money on defense. Who knew that was a thing Canadians wanted to do and had appetite for? But we do. And the idea of like these trade missions too, and being foreign oriented, like Canadians, I think typically, like, there's a reason the Trudeau government got away with being very domestically oriented, not having a lot of interest in the world outside Canada's borders for so long. I mean, the world was a different place then, but you could kind of do that. And Carney seems very deliberately and sort of intrinsically oriented towards the outside because he has all those international connections, and he's looking for partners and deals now.
So there's this interesting, you talked about the challenges of connecting the dots, around interprovincial trade and these mega projects. And this seems like another one of those.
Totally. But it's got a similarly long ephemeral payoff.
Right. Exactly.
Like what is, like, how fast he's like the trip that's upcoming, Japan, Australia, India, like, I would love to see someone like Trevor Toome or something, like, crunch the numbers on from the time you say you've signed an MOU or whatever with another country, how long does it take for that to ramp up? How does that money come back? But it's still got to be done. Like, it's like, if we don't start, we'll never finish. We'll never get there. But I think too, I would connect the foreign stuff, like that Carney's outward facing persona, to what's going on domestically. Like the Davos speech is the most dramatic example, but like, look at the mileage that thing got. It was unbelievable to be covered like that. And for Canadians, we are not used, like, we are used to people being like, who's that? Oh, that's the Canadian Prime Minister. What's his name? And instead it was
or
like,
nice socks.
The dude, right? Yes. like he was the guy.
Right.
Like when he wasn't at the Munich security conference, like I heard someone on a New York Times podcast very casually mention, well, if Mark Carney had been there, he would have been the headliner, but he wasn't there. So it was the German chancellor. That is a weird world to live in. And I think is pretty appealing to Canadians, particularly in the moment we're in. Like when we're being told we don't exist, we don't have a right to exist, we have no leverage, when we're being belittled in that way, and we already, I think, have a pre-existing sort of inferiority complex, or we're used to kind of riding sidecar, to have a prime minister who has real global esteem and is making a real splash on the world stage. Like, I don't think you can underestimate how much that plays into like the domestic sense of approval of him, and also like this aura of competence.
Right.
Like,
I mean, I think one thing that's remarkable is he has practiced at these kind of in this abstraction space and then communicating it out, right? A little bit in the central bank world, his previous roles. So that may be a strength of his. You mentioned the Davos speech, and one of my reactions when I heard about his speech, oh my God, what's Trump going to say?
Yeah, everyone did, and then he said nothing. Like,
well, did he say he
at first? Yeah.
So how do you think of that? His willingness to go there with the speech in terms of the evolving relationship with Trump.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's been real changes there.
Because they were bros. Like apparently they were texting.
Yeah, Carney seemed like,
which is hard to imagine.
Seemed like a person that Trump would. I don't know if Trump respects anyone, but Carney seemed like a person Trump respected. Like you have a stature that I consider worthy of my attention. You're not that pipsqueak Trudeau. Like there was something going on there for sure. If you were like back in the spring, but then I remember there was a news story, and I don't remember who broke it, but that they had a call, and somebody had intel from someone who was on the call that in the call Carney had called Trump transformative, and the way the news story landed was, well, Carney's all elbows up in public and being very pugnacious and talking about how like he's going to push back, and then in a call he's flattering him. Like, what is that? And it landed very like almost duplicitously.
Yes.
And then as time went on, and you saw the Conservatives really going hard at this through the summer, you know, he said he would get us a deal. He said he would fix this, and he hasn't fixed it. Like he hasn't done the job he was hired for. But as time has gone on, I think the general idea of what dealing with Trump looks like has changed for everyone. Like for everyone. I don't mean to sound like I'm making like an apology for Carney, but the world at large. Like I feel like this time last year there was a different sense of what was possible, or of surely things will come back to some sane ground. Like surely not this. Like I wish I had written. Like I'm trying to think of a way we could have put this down. Like. Or what would I, like I keep trying to think, like what would I look at for a snapshot of a moment in time this time last year of what we thought was beyond the pale that now like we would not even blink at. And by this, and like the flip side of that is, what do we now think a resolution looks like to the trade war, or I mean the 51st state stuff is on another level. And so I think in tandem with that, Carney's approach has changed. Like there was a very clear moment where he went to being more conciliatory and more sort of docile, and I think there was a real moment of political danger there where Canadians could have been like remember there was like elbows at half mast. Totally. But somehow it didn't metastasize into anything, and even now like there is no solution to the Trump problem. Like what is your solution to a natural disaster? What is that? What does that look like? But his posture has shifted over time. And you're right, Davos was, like, even though he didn't name him, everyone knew, and especially because of how it landed, that was a real shot across the bow, and there was real danger there. And then like the China trade deal, everyone kind of waited, like, where's the freak out coming? And then he was like, oh, good for him. And everyone was like, what? Like the only thing more unsettling than a Trump tantrum is when he's like, cool. And you're like,
for now, because then 2 days.
For now,
2 days
exactly.
Later,
and then the freak out comes.
Right. You know, I think you should write a column, you know, because you said you wish you'd written that column last year. I think you could still do it. You still have time.
Which column?
The one where you kind of say, what's the worst thing I can imagine?
Oh, yeah. No,
I've been
trying to think of a way to get at, like, how could I bookmark? You know what it makes me think of? There's a college, university in the U.S., Beloit College, that used to do this thing. They called it the mindset list, where every year with an incoming set of freshmen, they would have a list of this is the world these freshmen have grown up in, so that it started out as a way that it was supposed to sort of orient their profs to like, this is who's coming in. These are the 18-year-olds. But then it became like a real pop culture phenomenon. But I keep thinking, like, what was our mindset list this time last year? where were we? What did we think was possible? What did we think was the worst case scenario? And how has that shifted? Because like I was listening the other day to a podcast where I think, again, it was the New York Times. They were talking about the reactions to the 10, like after the Supreme Court invalidated the tariffs, and then the 10% and then the 15%. And they were talking about how companies and countries were reacting to that. And the thing that gets me is when it's totally casual. Like there's no one's leaning on this. They just said, well, like various countries and companies are calibrating how they react to, like, they're afraid of the backlash. Like they're afraid of the mob boss cutting off their pinky and like mailing it back to them. And it was just like, of course, that's what they're doing. And like, that is where, like, that's what we've become habituated to. Of course, that's what's going on.
Right. I do want to make a plea for questions here. If you want to step up to the microphone or send something by chat. Oh, I see some movement. No. There's a question. Yay. Okay.
Hello. Great to hear from you. I don't want to sound ignorant on this topic, but my impression is that Carney is more conservative than Trudeau.
Yes.
And probably where our conservatives used to be.
Yes.
Before they went further right. Does that help in the relations between the two sides? Do they acknowledge anything?
Which two sides? What do you
like
mean?
the conservatives versus the liberals?
Oh no, they hate each other a lot.
Okay,
like a lot.
Yeah, I was just curious.
I think in fact that worsens it. Like it's a good question.
Yeah,
I think it ratchets things up because he's eating Poilievre's lunch. Like Poilievre used to have a line of like, I would love it if he would steal my ideas, and then he stole all of his ideas. Like he just took them all. He's like, it was kind of a parlor game in Ottawa like 6 or 8 months ago. Like, is Carney a progressive conservative? And like more or less, yeah. He happens to wear a red coat because that's the team he plays for, but it's very much like a recognizable version of progressive conservatism. And I think, like, in terms of partisan politics, I think that ratchets up the tensions between him and Poilievre because, like, what is Poilievre's offer now? It makes his offer so much harder because it's like I like stupid pop culture analogies, but I used to like joke that like Poilievre, like he lost the two best enemies a boy ever had. Like I used to picture him like standing outside like Justin Trudeau's house with like a boombox blasting "I Will Remember You," and like he did such a good job of making Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax toxic that they're gone. And then what did he have? Like he was shadowboxing.
Yeah,
and so I think that in a very like grisly partisan politics way has just like cut Poilievre and the conservatives off at the knees, and they have shifted to the right, and so they're sort of serving a different constituency. But it's a good question because it's a really weird, interesting realignment because Trudeau was a very lefty version of liberalism, and this is very centrist, center right kind of progressive conservative. It's so, again, it's like everything has been flipped upside down.
So it's like the equivalent of what do you do with all those F Trudeau candles and merch that they had. It's the same thing. What do you do with that argument?
Although like the hardcore still managed to go out and have like the F Carney flag. And I'm like, what exactly is this, friend? Like, I'm not like you're entitled to your feelings, but like F what?
Yeah.
Like what?
Global elites. I think that's
global
what you're
elites. I know, but that's, somebody pointed out to me today. It'll be in a story, so I will give proper credit to this person. But someone pointed out to me today, I did an interview and they were saying like, they said like none of the rules with Carney, like none of the political rules seem to apply or make sense because like you're saying to yourself, like, where should we go out and make like a real splash on the global stage? Let's go to Davos. Like, let's go be the most global elite possible and completely stick it to Poilievre. And then they just keep going like
anchor
this.
that whole story, right?
Yeah.
Like you would think.
Amazing.
Okay.
Hi. So I'm really curious about what your thoughts are on the floor crossing and how he has handled it, the demeanor. He's managed to do it without being smug. Like, yes.
No, it's a really good question because it's so fascinating the way those have gone down, because two of them, like Michael Ma and this edition of Matt Jenner crossing, came out of nowhere. Like you'll often have a week where everyone in Ottawa will be like, someone's going to cross the floor, someone's going to cross the floor. And that was the case before Chris D'Entremont. So it was like a gossip trailer before like the movie arrived. But there were all these rumors back in the fall to the point that Jenner felt compelled to answer them with the world's weirdest, please don't talk to my family, but this isn't about me note. But Carney, I think that, like you were mentioning weaknesses, it's not so much a weakness inherent to him. I think it's a real danger zone. I think a lot of what he has inhabited in the last year has been sort of above politics. Like not, and I don't mean that in a partisan way, like the way we're talking about how he's kind of a progressive conservative. He has seemed not to be a greasy politician. He has, and I'm not saying like he is, I'm not like verifying that idea, but it's been like, I will just do this job for the country that needs me. And I think right before Matt Jenner crossed the floor, there was a lot of chatter about the idea of a snap election because people were looking, and I'm never sure in Ottawa whether like there's really a thing afoot that like someone heard something from someone or someone asks someone and then they ask 3 other people and then like we do a segment on power and politics about it and it's a thing, like because that happens sometimes. So people were looking at the polls with Carney ahead and thinking they were so close last time, why wouldn't they go now, get their 4 years, get their majority, they can do what they want. But I thought that had real political risk for him because I think for him to do something greasy and political and self-serving and cynical and crass, like, I just think that would be such an explosion of the persona he's occupied that has given him so much credibility. And I'm not, like, I want to be very clear, I'm not saying anything about what I actually know is in his heart, that he's as pure as the driven snow. I just mean, like, in terms of who he's been and who Canadians have given him credit for being, I think he's handled it really, really well to this point, where it's been this very, like, we know that they're talking behind the scenes. We know there's all kinds of meetings and there's like, we'll give you this if you come over. And like Matt Jenner is going to India and he got this weird like trade advisor role that makes no sense and didn't exist before. But I do think that's a real danger zone for Carney. But at the same time, they've pulled it off pretty masterfully where they've just had, ta-da, here's a new Liberal.
No
It's been like that's been one of the like, that's one of the examples to me of like, dude has political chops. Like who knew? Because that's kind of like a very wily political move. And then to do it and look like your hands are clean after is remarkable.
Yeah. Thank you.
How is Parliament functioning? Like this kind of brings to mind parliamentary process.
It was really bad back in the fall. Like it was at a standstill. It was like oppositional defiant disorder. Yeah. But then what happened since the new year, because there was this possibility of the snap election, or the idea that maybe there was a possibility, and the Conservatives badly don't want that now because looking at the numbers, they'd be toast. The NDP don't want that because there's like 4 of them and they don't have a leader and it would be bad. So like I wrote a column where I called it Cooperation Chicken, where they were all like, we'll cooperate just enough that you have no pretext to go to an election. And the Liberals were like, we'll keep accusing you of obstruction until we can maybe go to an election. And so there was this weird little like dance to it where you have seen language of cooperation coming from the Conservatives. That was very, you would never have heard that back in the fall. Like we will, and even if it was sort of smoke and mirrors, the fact that it was there seemed very significant.
Yeah. Well, didn't Poilievre arrange for a meeting with Carney shortly after he got?
Although it was kind of like a
photo op.
It was a photo op, but also like what came out of the meeting was very quid pro quo. Like I will cooperate if he does these 7 things I want. But even the fact that the meeting occurred or that there were mumblings about cooperation was very, very different.
So I want to make sure there's time and space for people to ask questions. I see, yeah, please get up there.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation. I was curious, Canada's having a big cultural moment right now, whether it be, you know, the Davos speech, 4 Nations a year ago, or even heated rivalry.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, one of the great American tools of soft power dominance was culture, and through whether music, movies, or political culture. I'm curious whether Carney is putting more eggs in that basket as Canadian values syndicate across popular cultural channels, or whether he's still kind of narrowing down to that brass tacks, nuts and bolts approach.
Yeah. That's such a smart question. That's so interesting. Like, I think my sense is that it has been the latter, but it would be smart if it was the former, right? He likes to, like, one of his catchphrases is like, we will be defined not by the value of our strength, but the strength of our values. And I don't know, that's one of those like phrases that's it's so neat, it's almost meaningless. Like, I don't know how to pull it apart, but you're right. We're having a bit of a moment. I don't know. It would make sense, right? Like people talk about cultural diplomacy. Heated rivalry sort of accidentally just like did it, and it was great. So I don't know if you can plan that kind of thing, but I haven't heard, like if I'm being honest, I have not heard that pillar from them. And they're very clear generally about these are the things we're doing. And I haven't heard a lot of talk of that, but it would make sense. I mean, maybe he thinks that the version of that is just I show up at Davos and give a barn burner of a speech and everyone talks about it for a week. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if that's really answering the question.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
It's a smart idea.
More questions and online as well. Just want to encourage
That
people.
I love that heated rivalry moment on the red carpet so much. Like I need like a word for like the moment that is like so delicious, but I'm very aware that it's designed to be delicious. Like it's like a McDonald's hamburger where you're like, this is full of chemicals that make me feel good, but like it's kind of fun.
Yay.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Excuse me. Is Mark Carney a wartime prime minister?
Oh. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Like, how would you like?
Well,
And I'm not cross-examining. I'm trying to understand like what answer, like what you're looking
with the advent of Donald Trump's second administration, we have never been in a more perilous situation as a nation. We are facing essentially an existential threat from a man who is clearly ungovernable by his own administration, and the Republican Party doesn't want to govern him. There are parallels between Canada today and Canada, well, the closest I can come to is 1938. And I think about Mark Carney and the constitution of his cabinet, where it is a very small cabinet, a very focused cabinet. And you've talked about where he's bolted on experts to take care of specific areas of policy or issues that need to be taken care of. And it reminds me so much of the King administration, where Canada, although we were under no threat of invasion, as far as we knew, faced a similar existential threat to our democracy. I see so many parallels there that the question keeps coming up for me. Is Mark Carney in that same mold? Is he a wartime prime minister?
It's interesting because I think there was a moment, or a lot of them back in the spring, where he was explicitly positioning himself that way, right? Like that was very much part of the offer in the window and part of the mood, like sort of this time last year, I would say, into the election and just after. I think he even talked about it. Like I feel like there was language around that. Or I think it was, a lot of it was sort of this idea of the level of unprecedented we have reached. Like we have to do things at speeds we haven't done since the Second World War. So it was that same invoking of a moment of great peril. I think one of the most interesting things he's said, and it wasn't on like a big, like a national stage, but I used it in my profile. There was a moment where he was at a Barry Brew pub during the election, and he said, you know, if this wasn't a crisis, you wouldn't see me. I'm most useful in a crisis, because his track record as a bank governor has been an almost alarming, like just coincidence of horrible crises that just like stick to him like magnets. You know, the financial crisis when he was bank governor here, Brexit, he somehow left the Bank of Canada right before COVID, which seems kind of weird given his track record that he kept being around. And so I think that was a very explicit part of his offer earlier on. It feels to me like that has sort of, I don't know if it's faded, if it's not part of his sales job anymore, if it's not part of how the public feels, but that was very much there. And it had that feel, right? Like it had that, like that's what I'm getting at in a very glib way by the, I don't know how bad this could get. Like it had this feeling of nobody knows what this, like how high the stakes are here. And here's this guy who seems to know what he's going to do about it. And so I think, like, I guess I'm effectively answering yes. I think that's what the public has wanted. That's how he's positioned himself. I'm hedging because I think the verdict is out and will be for some time on whether he can deliver on that and what that looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And one more question here, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much, Shannon. It's been kind of fun to be taken through a whirlwind tour of the last 14 months or so and be reminded of everything that's happened in such a short period of time.
It's been such a long decade, the last year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think Carney has certainly been the man of the moment to meet the moment. And you know, it's quite fortunate that he has, and you know, shown himself to be such a good statesman, and I would think that you know, I think he's been able to show that he can wield smart power, you know, both a combination of hard and soft, and while he's also sort of juggling, you know, these external threats, while keeping the country or trying to keep the country together. And that was the part I really wanted to ask about, in terms of, I think there's a little bit of reference to it early, but, he's leading from the center, but, we have a very decentralized country. Our provinces hold a lot of power. And so to be able to hold the country together at such a time when there's such disparate pressures coming from different regions of the country while fending off, threats coming from the south. I just wondered if you could sort of speak to that aspect of the position that he's in as Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think those internal unity problems are could be a very big deal and force him to fight a two-front war, right? It's and we have been in such a rally round the flag moment for the last year. I mean, I joked, but there hasn't been, even in a very surfacey way, I haven't heard a lot of concern from Quebec about, even remember the Plains of Abraham speech that went down like a stink bomb 2 days after Davos, and it was 2 days of coverage and then it just went away and everyone moved on. Or I haven't heard sustained concerns in Quebec about his lack of his relative weakness in French or lack of use of it. So there's been this moment, my point is what we've been riding to this point, I think is the exact opposite of that. It has been very rally around the flag, united, but you have these fractures starting to appear that will be driven by very mechanical political developments, like the Quebec election in the fall looks likely to be separatist party in government, and they've made very clear their intentions. Danielle Smith, in spite of the MOU, with these referendum questions coming, and it seems to me she has her own domestic, as in within the province, opposition to Ottawa is always a great sell, right? It always hits an important nerve. And I don't mean to suggest that it's just a manipulative nerve, there are real feelings there. So that's always a useful note to strike. And those things are not really within his control, right? He can, I guess it's a question of how much he can give those provinces of what they want to quell that. But I'm not sure if the forces driving that disunity and that frustration toward the center, I'm not sure if that's the answer to the question they're asking. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think that's a real challenge upcoming. And I don't think he's blind to it. I don't think he doesn't realize it. There's also a question of, it's very hard to divide your attention. If you have, one segment of the country that's feeling very disaffected, perhaps you can pour on some extra attention, some extra, whether it's policy or rhetorical attention or whatever. But if you have two and very different things going on, and I mean, Danielle Smith, I think, has been pretty explicit about saying, we want what Quebec has. And so there's a real kind of tension within the areas of tension. I think it's going to be a tough go for sure. I mean, I don't make predictions anymore because, as I mentioned, that's for fools, but that seems like a live wire.
All right, thank you.
All right, so we're pretty much at time. I'm resisting the urge to ask you to make a call about whether there's going to be an election.
No, I don't make predictions anymore. And also the idea of another election just makes me want to lie down under this desk and take a nap.
Shannon, do you have any last words? Anything you want to share? You don't.
No,
pressure.
I mean, I would just say it's a really interesting moment to be covering federal politics. It really is. It's a really interesting government to cover. I've sort of described, to me, Carney as a man is sort of the same as the government, which is he's a very finely tuned machine inside a plexiglass box where you can see, because he's so precise in his speech and in what he does, where the policy focus is, you can see what he's telling you to pay attention to or what he's telling you he's paying attention to. You can also see what he's refusing to engage with. So there's a real interesting kind of transparency there. And I don't mean that transparency writ large, the transparency that drives democracy, but there's a legibility there, I guess, and a crunchiness to it. It's not I know I've been quite catty about the difference from the Trudeau government. Oh, the differences are real, but there's a lot for us to work with, is I guess what I'm saying.
He's letting us in the black box a little bit. If we can kind of
and there's when we're doing big things fast, there's a lot for us to are you getting it done? Are you doing what you said? Right. How is this going? It's a neat moment.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Really great. Thank you. Put your hands together. Just a little procedural point. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please join us at the next lecture of the State of Canada series, which will feature Dr. Philippe Lagacé, Dr. Laura McDonald, and our own Dale Eisler, and they're going to discuss Canada's place in the world. So it's a nice follow-on to this conversation. And details and a link to register are on the JSGS website, probably in the chat if you're online. Thank you for joining us today, and please join us at the reception just out the way here, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.